Welcome back to the Gameful Intelligence in the AI Era for Business Growth and Personal Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Elhanan Gazit. Let's dive in.
We tend to think of focus as a constant tug of war, right?
Yeah.
Like sheer act of mental muscle just to keep our attention locked in.
Yeah, exactly. Like pure willpower.
But what if our brains are actually operating much more proactively? Maybe like seasoned gamers anticipating their opponent's moves.
Well, that's what's fascinating here. There's a 2025 neuroscience study that throws a completely new light on how we handle distractions.
Oh, really? How so?
Instead of just swatting them away as they appear, it seems our brains are actively predicting them, intercepting them, even before they even register in our conscious awareness.
Wow.
This insight actually comes to us from Dr. Elhanan Gazit's Gameful Intelligence podcast, The Corner, and it's truly a game changer in how we understand attention.
Exactly. So the mission for this deep dive then is to really get under the hood of that, understand how our brains pull off this feat of preemptive distraction blocking based on this study. It almost sounds like a built-in defense system for our minds.
It is, kind of. The study used a pretty sophisticated brain scanning technique called MEG. Yeah, magnetoencephalography. Think of it like an incredibly sensitive microphone for brain activity. It let the researchers pinpoint exactly when and where these predictive signals were happening.
Okay, so super precise timing.
Incredibly precise. They could identify signals related to the location of potential distractors really, really early, just 175 milliseconds after a placeholder popped up on the screen.
175 milliseconds. That's faster than the blink of an eye.
It really is.
So even before we consciously think, uh-oh, something distracting might show up there, our brains are already, preparing the defenses.
That's the idea. The key finding really is this notion that the brain forecasts and then actively dampens down these potential distractions before they even hit our conscious radar.
It just underscores how incredibly adaptable our brains are, doesn't it?
Precisely. And this is really where the concept of gameful intelligence, which Dr. Gazit talks about, becomes so relevant.
Right.
It suggests our minds are constantly adapting, kind of leveling up, you could say, to navigate the complexities of our environment, just like a skilled player masters a game to reach peak performance.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of this experiment then. What exactly did the participants have to do in this 2025 study?
All right. So the core of it was a visual search task. Participants saw various colorful objects, and some of these were designed to be distracting.
Standard attention stuff, mostly?
Mostly. But here's the crucial element. These distracting objects tended to appear in predictable locations.
Okay.
Even though, and this is important, the participants weren't explicitly told about this pattern, they weren't consciously aware of it.
So even if they weren't thinking, hey, that bright yellow thing often pops up top right, their brains were subconsciously picking up on that regularity.
That's the central insight, yeah. The researchers saw this significant surge in neural activity in the temporo-occipital regions.
Those are the visual processing parts of the brain.
Exactly. The areas heavily involved in processing what we see. And this surge happened very early in the trial. Suggesting the brain was proactively dialing down the attention going towards those expected distractor locations.
Okay. So that leads us straight to the first key finding, this idea of proactive distraction suppression. Our brains are basically learning to tune out predictable noise before it even fully registers.
Exactly. And like we said, this anticipatory pattern showed up in those visual areas around that 175 millisecond mark right after the placeholder.
So fast.
It's incredibly rapid. And what's really remarkable is how this tiny biological process connects to our broader cognitive abilities, our strategic behaviors.
And this is where it links up with John R. Anderson's work from back in 2001, the cross-scale continuity thing.
Precisely that. Anderson's idea was that these millisecond-level biological events happening deep in the brain, they have a direct and pretty significant influence on our longer-term strategies, how we learn, how we adapt.
So in this case, the brain's ability to filter distractions in real time is actively shaping how well we perform on the task itself.
And potentially shaping our overall ability to focus down the line. It's real-time filtering affecting future performance.
Makes perfect sense. It's like the brain's constantly tweaking its internal spam filter based on experience, all happening unconsciously super fast.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Now, the second key finding you mentioned talks about shared mechanisms. For both proactive and reactive attention, what does that tell us?
Okay, this is really crucial. The researchers found that the very same brain regions active before a distractor appeared, during that anticipatory phase, were also active after the distractor showed up, specifically around the 200 millisecond mark.
So the brain isn't using one system to anticipate and then flipping a switch to a totally different system to react.
Exactly right. It strongly suggests a unified neural system, one system handling both the anticipation and the reaction to distractions. It's not two separate mechanisms working independently. It seems to be a single, integrated attentional circuit. And this finding really lends strong support to another of Anderson's ideas, his relevance thesis.
Okay, remind us, what's the core idea of the relevance thesis?
Anderson argued that these really fast, sort of low-level neural processes, they aren't just background noise, they're absolutely critical for understanding and even predicting higher-level cognitive outcomes.
Like learning focus.
Exactly. Learning focus, even how we make complex decisions. This study basically provides tangible neural evidence for that critical link between the super-fast brain stuff and the bigger picture outcomes.
Okay, got it. And the third key finding, that one hones in on learning through repetition and these things called micro-memory traces. How does that work with distractions?
Right. So the study showed the brain wasn't just reacting fresh to each trial, it was continuously encoding patterns from previous trials.
Like where distractions had popped up before?
Exactly. And it was using that stored information, those subtle memory traces, to guide attention in the next trial. And again, importantly, this happened even when people weren't consciously aware they were learning a pattern.
Wow. So our brain is kind of like this background data analyst, constantly spotting subtle patterns and using them to make predictions, even about stuff we're not actively thinking about.
Precisely. It's a fantastic illustration of how statistical learning just accumulates through experience, often without us even noticing. And it lines up really well with Anderson's decomposition thesis.
Which is the idea
Which basically posits that our long-term cognitive skills, like sustained attention or maybe even leadership effectiveness, they're built up from countless tiny repeated micro-events, these little learning moments that just stack up over time.
It's genuinely fascinating how these tiny, unconscious processes build up to have such a big impact on, well, everything we do.
It really is.
Now, you mentioned the study itself didn't explicitly use the term gameful intelligence.
That's correct, yeah.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we connect these neuroscience findings to that specific concept from Dr. Gazit?
Well, Dr. Gazit's discussion essentially takes these compelling neuroscience findings and interprets them through the lens or the framework of gameful intelligence.
Okay.
It's about seeing how this built-in biological mechanism, the anticipation, the reaction, the learning loop, perfectly aligns with the core principles of gameful intelligence. The idea of constantly adapting and improving, like a player getting better at a game.
And this ties back somehow to John Anderson's 7 orders of magnitude problem. That sounds pretty epic.
It is a huge challenge. Anderson basically challenged cognitive science back in 2001 to create models that could bridge this massive gap in timescales.
What kind of gap?
From the millisecond firing of neurons, what he called the biological band, all the way up to the years it takes for complex social behaviors or personal growth to unfold the social band.
Wow, okay. Milliseconds to years. That is a big gap.
Huge. And the study, you could argue, offers a valuable piece of that puzzle, connecting that very fast neural activity to attentional control, which underpins so much longer-term behavior.
So you're saying this 2025 study provides some real concrete neural evidence for building that bridge.
Yeah.
Specifically for how we handle attention and distractions.
Absolutely. It gives neural support for a core idea in gameful intelligence, that our ability to adapt and perform well isn't just about willpower or having the right mindset. It's deeply rooted in how our brains are actually wired to anticipate, react, and learn from what happens.
And it relies on interacting with our own history, essentially.
Exactly. Past experiences shaping future responses. In a way, the brain is constantly gamifying attention, optimizing based on past plays.
Okay, so let's bring this into today. How does all this become especially relevant now in our world?
Yeah.
With generative AI everywhere, constant digital pings.
Yeah, it's incredibly relevant. In an environment that's just saturated with information, with this ever-increasing barrage of potential distractions, many amplified by sophisticated AI, let's be honest. Understanding that focus isn't just about trying harder, but it's a fundamental neural strategy becomes super important.
Right.
Knowing how our brains naturally try to filter things out in real time gives us really valuable insights. We can use that to design better ways of working, learning, even just living in this new landscape.
So it suggests we can be much more strategic about managing our own attention and maybe the attention of our teams or families too in these AI-heavy environments.
Precisely. Gameful intelligence, seen through this lens, helps empower people, whether you're a leader, an entrepreneur, an educator, a parent, to think and act more like those high-performing players we talked about earlier.
By understanding and maybe even leveraging these built-in brain mechanics.
Exactly, to navigate these complex AI-enhanced systems more effectively and ultimately achieve greater focus and maybe be more productive.
Okay, so let's boil it down. What are some concrete, actionable takeaways? How can people listening apply these insights day to day, or maybe in their work?
Okay, first big one. Train your focus like it's a game skill. This proactive ignoring of distractions. It's not just something you have or don't have, it's a learned ability.
Right, trainable.
Yeah. And you can help your brain build that predictive focus by creating consistent patterns around potential distractions. For example, that simple tip. Always putting your phone in the same specific spot when you need to do deep work.
Ah, so you're giving your brain a predictable pattern for the distraction.
Exactly. You're helping it learn where the noise usually comes from so it gets better at tuning it out proactively.
That's really practical. I can see how that would work. Okay, what's another key insight?
Second, especially relevant in this AI era, we perhaps need to rethink leadership as designing mental architecture.
Designing mental architecture, what do you mean?
Well, effective leaders aren't just setting strategy, they're actively shaping the attentional environment for their teams. This study shows the brain optimizes by learning what to filter out, right? So forward-thinking leaders should be constantly asking, how can I minimize the unnecessary cognitive load? What noise can I proactively remove from my team's mental environment? It becomes a critical leadership function.
That definitely shifts the perspective. It's not just about assigning tasks, but curating a focused space, mentally speaking.
Precisely. Leading the environment, not just the people in it.
Okay. And the final practical insight you wanted to highlight.
It really comes back to Anderson's framework and understanding how micro decisions scale up to create mega impact.
Okay.
Remember, those super fast, almost invisible neural processes, like suppressing a potential distraction, they underpin long-term success. When you practice this consistently, it creates this compounding effect on your focus, your productivity, your effectiveness over time.
Like compound interest, but for attention.
Exactly. It's the compound interest of attention. And in a business context, or any team context, really, it emphasizes how every repeated behavior, every choice about where you direct attention, it becomes part of the operational code.
Right.
It shapes the long-term trajectory.
These are incredibly valuable insights, really practical stuff. Now, I know Dr. Gazit also proposes a gameful challenge link to this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a great little experiment. It's called Design Your Distraction Loop. Simple, but potentially really eye-opening. It's a 3-day challenge.
Okay, what do you do?
Step 1, choose one major source of distraction for you. Could be Slack pings, checking WhatsApp, scrolling TikTok, your email, inbox, whatever your main thing is.
Got it. Pick your poison.
Yeah. Step 2, for the next 3 days, you intentionally put that specific distraction, the app, the notification source in the same place, physical or digital, at a consistent time each day.
Okay, deliberate consistency.
Deliberate consistency. Step 3, consciously track your own attentional response to it. Do you start noticing it less? Does your brain seem to anticipate it without you consciously focusing on it?
And after the 3 days, what's the point of reflection?
The challenge pushes you to ask, did the mental noise from that distraction seem to lessen? Did you feel a bit more in control of your attention? And critically, what system, not just brute willpower, but what system did you start to develop to manage it?
Looking for the underlying mechanism.
Exactly, because the core idea here is that true power over attention comes from prediction, from building these systems, not just constantly reacting in the moment.
That sounds like a fantastic, really hands-on way to start playing with this idea of proactive distraction management in your own life.
It is.
So, okay, to kind of wrap this whole up, the big takeaway here seems to be that our brains aren't just passively taking stuff in. They're actively predicting, actively suppressing distractions. And this is a fundamental piece of what Dr. Gazit calls gameful intelligence.
Precisely. This meeting point between the neuroscience and the principles of gameful intelligence, it offers this really compelling view. Our brains are inherently wired for efficiency, and we can consciously tap into that innate ability for some pretty significant personal and professional growth.
Especially now.
Especially as we navigate this increasingly complex AI-infused world.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How consciously designing our environments, our routines, how that could leverage this amazing predictive power our brains already have to sharpen focus, achieve more.
Absolutely. It puts more control back in our hands, potentially.
Yeah. Well, this has been incredibly insightful.
And if you, listening, have found this deep dive into the proactive brain and gameful intelligence as fascinating as we have, we definitely encourage you to follow Dr. Elhanan Gazit. Keep an eye out for his posts about his upcoming book.
Right. What's the working title again?
The working title is Gameful Intelligence: The Secrets of Business Growth and Personal Happiness in the Gen AI Era.
And who would benefit most from checking that out?
Well, it's really valuable for a wide range of people: CEOs, business leaders, certainly entrepreneurs, but also educators, parents, honestly, anyone interested in personal growth and figuring out how to thrive in this new era we're entering.
Fantastic. Lots to think about there.
Thank you, my AI co-host, Marshal and Daphne. Thanks for tuning in into the Gameful Intelligence podcast. Subscribe, share, and stay curious.